One thing I found really interesting in your book is that you were arguing that not only was the military not in charge of the officers,
Right.
but like the mil nobody was even in charge of the military. There was like no, I think you had to call it a system of irresponsibility. That it was like just basically government by committee. Tell me more about that. Like, why does that lead to mistakes?
Well, I'm going to flip it around and look at how the West has done it. It's all about it's supposed to be, and of course there are exceptions, that it's not that it's about you if you have a particular job. It's that your job gives you certain authority by law to do things, and then we have courts to adjudicate when you in that position other people think that you've exceeded your authority and they start suing about different things. And that's how it goes in the West. It's very legalistic, goes all the way back to the Romans. This is, when I think about what is the West, it's Greek logic, it's Roman law, and then it's these Judeo-Christian moral values. Those are essential pillars of what the West is all about. So in Japan, it's, yeah, they get laws and they westernize, but they have their own indigenous way of dealing with things. And it's very much about different in groups and out groups handling things in whatever the committee is. And so we're going, well, who actually did that and whose fault is it? Because we have this very legalistic way, and fault in law, we're going to either put you in jail or whatever. So it's different ways of organizing ourselves. But we in the West assume, because going back to Roman times, is that institutions are going to be a really big thing, that's how things are going to work. So then when we get into somewhere like Iraq, and we think the police is going to still be functioning after we blow the government, it's like, whoa, 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 whoa. It's not an institutionalized, it's not I don't know, I'm no expert, but you're projecting the kind of institutional setup that Western countries typically have to other people. They may name these things the same thing, police or whatever, but they may function in very different ways.
When you look at the soldiers who fought these hopeless battles, where tens of thousands of them on a single island might starve or be forced into a bonsai charge that they knew was hopeless and they were all going to die, and they knew that they were put in this hopeless situation because of these destructive, petty fights between the Navy and the Army, where one of them isn't willing to supply the other one. Why didn't that break their morale more? It's just like, look, we're supposed to die and commit seppuku because you guys didn't give us the right supplies because you guys aren't willing to share information or something.
I don't know the answer because I'm not a social historian where you would really be doing, I've done more diplomatic and military, so you're looking top down. But what you're asking is a very important question for how do individuals react to all this, and that I do not know the answer. And you'd have to. And there's another piece that makes it hard in Japan, since people don't want to talk about failure because it's considered a loss of faith. Whereas in the West, one of the fundamental assumptions of Christianity is we're all sinners, right? Original sin. We're all defective goods from the very beginning, and so there isn't this expectation for perfection because it's known you're kind of a mess to begin with, and so you can talk about these things. So that's a whole other problem of getting people to open up about truly horrible events. So I don't know the answer. I know that the World War II generation, they came home, they just didn't talk about it with their children, and it's just not a matter for discussion. So I can't answer that of why they followed. But you look in the West, in World War I, soldiers would go up and over the trenches and they knew exactly what was going to happen to them. And yeah, there were people who didn't, and then they were court-martialed and shot. A lot of people were shot in World War I. But there's been a change in society about what young men are willing to do when their officers start telling them. The way the Russians solved this problem in Ukraine, but Stalin would do this too, is you send people up ahead and then you've got the KGB or whatever, the killer unit, so that anyone who tries to go the wrong way in the battlefield, they get machine gunned by their own side. That's one way to get an army to go forward, and that's what Putin is doing right now. But anyway, it's in more democratic places, people aren't willing to go along with this now. But in the West, we did it too.
When you're having lunch with your colleagues, with the people who are also experts in this field, and you're discussing, look, what are still the big unresolved questions? We don't understand why this person did X or why events transpired in a certain way. What are like the big things where you guys have to hassle it out?
Oh, well, it's more if someone's decided what the curriculum's going to be. And and then you teach it. Oh, and by the way, as of like 6 months ago, I've moved to the Maritime History Center, so I'm no longer teaching. So I'm just doing research at this stage. Uh, well, I think the whole point of the curriculum at the War College is to get people out of the operational level. So the junior course is about the strategic effects of operation. It's like, okay, Pearl Harbor, to me, as an example I'll use is Pearl Harbor. It's an A-plus military operation. They sink everything. Of course, it's shallow water, and we raise most of it afterwards. They lose nothing. I mean, boy, how can you do a more perfectly choreographed military operation than that one, except it turns an absolutely isolationist country to one hell-bent coming after Japan, and that would be called a strategic disaster. So you got to be cautious about your military actions and think about what are the strategic consequences, and it's very difficult to gauge those accurately. So that's one big issue that you need to get at. And then for the seniors, it's okay, great. You're an officer and you understand, if you're in the Army, you understand about how to use armies and the Navy, about how to use navies. But how does this integrate with all the other instruments of national power that actually account for how wars turn out? And economics is a huge one. And there is no definitive answer in these wars, but rather you can give analytical concepts. And this is my reason for doing these lectures, is to say, hey, don't play half-court tennis. Wouldn't that be a basic thing? Is it going to provide you the answers if you look at the other side? No, it won't, but it'll position you to be in a better shape. Or tossing out limited versus unlimited wars, and unlimited wars are putting people on death ground. Does that answer the question? No, but it goes, okay, if Vladimir Putin has an unlimited objective vis-a-vis the world order, and he's basically said that he does, then compromising with him would be a mistake on that subject, right? And you're going to have to deal with him one way or another. So it's what is it? History isn't over. The long-standing struggle between continental powers that want to divide the world up into mutually exclusive spheres of influence and butcher each other over territory, very negative sum. They tend to be very authoritarian. Or this maritime order that says, hey, surely join the party. Follow the rules, you'll make money, right? And this is Angela Merkel's thinking this of, hey, she was a German chancellor for many years, and she's thinking, Putin, we'll sell him a lot of oil, he'll make money. It's a win-win, surely. Well, he's back to his continental stuff, destroying wealth and lives. That's what the alternate world order looks like, is killing people to get things. It's more promising to spread the other one. And this disagreement has been going on for a long, long time.
I feel like we had a mini version of this debate in the podcast we did a year ago.
I have a limited number of ideas. I'm trying to repeat.
If you just said, we can't compromise with people who will have these unlimited goals, like Putin, who have these territorial goals. If we're using the analogy as you're explicitly making it to Japan during World War II, look, what it took, if we wanted to say we're not going to compromise with your territorial goals, we will stop you in every way. What it took was a world war that led to an unconditional surrender. So if we're using that analogy, does that imply that no compromise requires some unconditional surrender type event?
No.
Doesn't this contradict the death ground thing?
There's something called precision nuclear strike. And it has changed things. During World War II, the United States had sanctuary, which means other people couldn't touch us at home. And our productive base was not touched, and that was essential. There are many things that were essential for Allied victory. Take any one of them away, and the outcome's different. One of the essential things is this productive base. This time around, all kinds of people can come get the United States. So a lot of times in foreign affairs, you can't solve things. And I don't know who originally said this, but you manage things. And so this is where the sanctions and things come in. of you give people a timeout from the world order. You don't solve it. You look at North Korea. That is not solved by a long shot. But at least South Korea can go become prosperous, and the North is just sitting with its timeout and being more and more malign at home. But it's more like that. It's of not recognizing, for instance, conquests. And this is what went on actually when Stalin took over the Baltic states. We never recognized that. In fact, they ran governments in exile based on the funds that I think, oh yeah, there were Baltic states had their funds in U.S. banks. So when Stalin overran them, I think those funds became what funded their embassies. And so, N generations later, we recognize their independence. You can't, these things are not solved on anyone's watch. And basically, if you want the way the last Cold War ended is because the Chinese and Russians changed their minds. You have to wait for others to come to their own decisions.
What is the track record of sanctions actually changing other people's mind? Because if you look at the world today,
Unknown.
but just to finish the question, because you're advocating that as the way we should proceed this, so it's worth asking. If you look at the world today, North Korea, we've sanctioned them for decades. If the idea is we're going to deprive them of resources to do these bad things, well, they're just going to divert resources from their civilians to the military.
Yeah.
And you're just making the people poor. You're not changing the government's decisions. Same thing
Right.
in Iran, same thing in Venezuela. So
Correct.
what are we're just like making the people poor. We're not even changing the government's decision. What's the idea here?
I don't know the answer, and I'm working on an edited book with a wonderful colleague who knows much more about economics than I do. And we have all kinds of chapters. This book will not be a good read, but because you want to learn things. And so I've done a lot of edited books to learn things, different kinds of naval operations, and then they feed into the books that are more overarching. But this one's on sanctions, and we're in the process of writing the concluding chapter now. And the things that you're bringing up, I have sanctions don't seem to make people do what you want them to do. And so a lot of people go, well, they don't work. But boy, do they inflict pain. And then, of course, you're doing it on usually an authoritarian regime that diverts as much of that pain as possible into the civilian population and then uses that as an excuse to justify its rather brutal rule. And I don't have the answer. And the other piece is, so you're dealing with these expansionist powers with a limited toolkit. And the question is which tool to use. And I truly don't have the answer. But what you've mentioned a really good counter argument. And I've given you an argument, and I don't know which the rebuttal is the better one, honestly. And I think the whole approach, this is another thing about what do you were asking me what you're worried about, but here's something to help you with what you're worried about, is thinking in terms of arguments, counter arguments, and rebuttal. So you have an argument, I have an argument, and on this one, I'm not sure what the rebuttal is. But it's a good way of thinking about things because it allows you to change your mind. You may well be right, or I may be right, or maybe we're right in one country but another one. I honestly don't know the answer.
Yeah, it does seem like one of the biggest things you want to try to figure out in strategy in general, because if you try to do sanctions, it doesn't seem to work that well. Well, if you try to replace the regime, I mean, people said, like, look, Saddam's regime after his invasion in Kuwait, this is somebody who has territorial goals. So we can't have somebody who's going to keep trying to do this in power. You try to replace that, that doesn't work.
Well, that worked well. Yeah, right.
Yeah. So just like the idea, what do you do with irascible regimes?
Well,
that
actually,
does seem like a big open question.
In the Gulf War, Bush Sr. fought a limited war for a limited objective. The limited objective was get Iraqi troops out of Kuwait, restore the Kuwaiti government. Those were the two really big things. And then call it a day when you've done those things. That's what he did. And it was an incredibly successful war, and it went to our heads. So, right? Because when you run a successful limited war, it's over very rapidly. You get stuff with not too much cost, and it's done. So then we try to do the total makeover of another country. And excuse me, what right does one country have to do a total makeover on another country? And then, of course, the Russians and Chinese are apoplectic watching us do this, and that's a problem. Or you think about Afghanistan, maybe you go in there and you at least boot Osama bin Laden out of the country and then proclaim it victory and leave.
All right, going back to Japan.
Yeah, okay.
Um,
I try to divert you.
no, I did the diverting. It was interesting. Do we have some sense of what Japanese public opinion was like through the 30s and 40s?
I don't know.
Okay.
And it's also because it's becoming more and more authoritarian. And yeah, I have no idea on that subject. And again, it's a social historian. That would require really detailed knowledge that I don't know.
I had Daniel Yergin, who wrote the prize, which
Oh,
is the Pulitzer Prize winning history of oil. And he has a big section in the book about World War II because, in his view, oil was a big component of why the war happened the way it did. And one of the interesting points he made was that he thinks that the kamikaze missions, a big part of the motivation behind them was that Japan lacked the fuel to have the pilots fly back. Is that accurate?
oh, it's worse than that. They don't have the fuel to actually train the pilots. And as we learned in 9/11, sorry to bring it back, it's really much easier to learn how to take off a plane and crash it into something, right? That's what those guys were doing, than it is to teach them how to make safe landings under weird conditions. So the kamikaze was just an act of, it's a guided missile. And it was an act of having very few assets at the end of the war and not enough fuel to fly anyone anywhere. So it's going to be a guided missile into an aircraft carrier or a battleship destroyer or something.
One of the things I learned from your book is the overwhelming fraction of deaths on the Japanese side during the war happened after it was known that they were going to lose. I think in the last 14 months, and this is all from your book, at 1.8 million of the total 2.1 million Japanese deaths, that's 85% of the total happened in the last 14 months of the war. And a similar thing is true with Germany, where I think 43% of the deaths happened in the last year of the war. I think like 2.3 million out of the 5.3 million. Walk me through what is going on inside government when the higher level people must know that they're losing, but they're going to make bigger and bigger sacrifices.
You're conflating, I think, Western values about what the purpose of the government is. Well, in commonwealth, commonweal is common good. And this notion that governments are about the well-being of individuals. Okay, well, we're not in societies where we're talking about individuals for openers. Certainly not in Japan. Then there's another, well, why the deaths so huge? It's at the end of these wars, you've broken the transportation system that gets produce to hungry mouths, and you've also removed so much manpower literally from the fields. You aren't producing anything, so that you're talking about mass starvation as the result of having done a number of previous years of warfare. And also this mass starvation helps account for why one side gets shattered and quits. And then the thing that ought to give everyone pause is, okay, if Japan's economy was, I don't know, a tenth of ours in World War II, and these are the kind of costs that they could inflict, watch it on getting into wars with countries that you think you're vastly superior to. It may not work out. The costs are horrific. I mean, you're illustrating the problems with this continental order of taking territories. This is how it goes. But sometimes other people visit wars on you, and then you're into their world of hurt. I mean, I think it's like Angela Merkel or Neville Chamberlain back in World War II, who's going, surely these people don't want to do this. It's going to wind up being a bloodbath. Surely they don't want to. So Neville Chamberlain makes the compromise at Munich, thinking surely this will be it. We'll compromise them, they'll go. Wrong. They're going to come in for the whole thing.